My mom's voice keeps calling me from downstairs, but she's been dead for 3 years. I did not want to move back into that house. If my dad had not started wandering at night, setting burners on low and then forgetting them, I never would have agreed. But the assisted living place had a waiting list, and someone had to pack up the last 27 years of our lives. My brother lived 3 states away with 2 toddlers and a wife on rotating night shifts, so that someone ended up being me. The house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, like it had shrunk without us. The siding needed power washing. The flower beds my mom used to fuss over were mostly dirt and stubborn weeds, but the curtains in the living room were still the ones she picked out. The porch light still had the tiny crack from when I slammed the door too hard during a teenage meltdown. Everything was wrong and exactly the same. Inside, it was worse. My dad had not really moved anything. It was as if he'd just learned to live around the absence. Her mug was still on the kitchen shelf, chipped lip turned toward the wall. The Afghan she crocheted was folded over the back of the couch, the remote tucked underneath the same way she used to hide it from my dad when she thought he watched too much television. There was a grocery list in her handwriting stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Half of the items were already crossed off. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a long time, looking at that list. My name was there at the bottom, written in the margin with a question mark next to it. Call my name? Underlined twice. I had canceled that call. Probably said I was busy. I do not really remember. Upstairs, my old bedroom smelled like dust and paper. The posters were gone, but the faint rectangles where the sun had not touched the paint still marked where they used to hang. My bed was made with a mismatched set of sheets. I sat down on it and the springs complained in the same way I remembered. The one thing that felt exactly the same was the staircase. Our staircase runs straight up from the front hallway, steep and narrow with a landing halfway where it turns and continues. When I was a kid, I used to sit on the top step and listen to my parents talk in the kitchen, their voices drifting up in pieces. When I was older, I used to stomp down it to make a point, or tiptoe up it after curfew, carefully avoiding the third step because it squeaked. Now I avoided it because the last time I saw my mom alive, she was at the bottom of those stairs. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. Her hand on the banister, her mouth opening around my name. The half step forward that turned into a collapse. I remember the sound her body made hitting the floor more clearly than anything the paramedics said. After that night, whenever I came home to visit, I would take the stairs 2 at a time, eyes fixed on the wall, never looking down. Alone in the house that first night, I did not go downstairs after it got dark. I told myself it was because I was tired from the drive and the boxes and the endless sorting. I told myself I did not want to track dust up the stairs. But when I brushed my teeth in the tiny upstairs bathroom and caught sight of the open stairwell in the mirror behind me, I flicked the light on in the hallway and then closed the bathroom door. Later, lying in my childhood bed, I scrolled through my phone, brightness turned all the way up, as if that would keep the rest of the house at bay. Notifications, old messages, social media posts, little glowing distractions. The quiet had weight to it. Houses are not supposed to be that quiet. Even in the silence, you can usually hear something. Pipes, a refrigerator humming, the distant whoosh of a car going by. Here, it felt like the house was holding its breath. I do not know how long I lay there before it happened. Time gets strange when you're trying not to think about anything. Then, from downstairs, clear as a bell, I heard her. My name, spoken in my mother's voice, drifting up from the bottom of the stairs in the exact tone she used when supper was ready, and she was trying not to sound impatient. For a second, my brain did not even process it as wrong. It slotted perfectly into some old groove of memory, that familiar worn edge of her tired warmth. I almost called back before the rest of reality caught up and crashed over me. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I stared at my bedroom door, heart pounding so hard my vision blurred. The sound was so clear. Not muffled like a neighbor through a wall, not distorted like a television. It was as if she were standing in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, leaning her head back, calling up. I swallowed, told myself I must have dozed off. It had to be one of those half dreams that cling for a second and then dissolve. Then I heard it again. Same rhythm, same upward lilt at the end of my name. Louder, like she was closer now, or like she thought I had not heard her the first time. I sat up slowly. The room felt colder than it had a moment before. I listened for a television left on downstairs, for a radio, for anything. Nothing. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Grief does strange things to the brain. Moving back, being surrounded by her things, the stress with my dad. It made sense that my mind would reach for old sounds, old habits. Still, I got out of bed. The hallway light buzzed to life when I flipped the switch. The bulb flickered once, as if it were thinking about going out, before it steadied. My bare feet were too loud against the wood as I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. The bottom of the staircase was a pool of shadow. The front door was closed. The small table by the door was exactly how I remembered it. Bowl for keys, a stack of junk mail, the little ceramic bird my mom insisted brought good luck. I waited. No voice, no movement. Just that strange, thick quiet. I went down anyway. Every creak of the steps sounded sharper than it should have. At the landing, I paused, gripping the rail. I half expected to see her there, hand outstretched, as solid as the banister under my fingers. There was nothing. Downstairs, I checked the front door first. Still locked. I tugged on it just to make sure. The deadbolt was firm. The chain was in place. No signs anyone had been there. The living room was empty. The television cold and dark, no little red light glowing in the corner. I touched it just to prove it. The couch, the Afghan, the framed photos on the wall, 3 of us together, frozen in happier years, watched me with their flat glass eyes. Kitchen, lights off, window latched, the back door secure, no neighbor's voice drifting in. The air in there still carried the faint, stale smell of old coffee and cleaning supplies. I opened closets I did not need to open, checked behind the bathroom shower curtain like a child. Nothing. No one. By the time I climbed the stairs again, I felt foolish. Embarrassed even, although there was no one there to see. I scolded myself in my head. Stress, lack of sleep, moving, grief, that was all. A brain full of old pathways firing in the dark. Halfway up, the stair light flickered. It was a quick hiccup, barely a second, but in that blink of dimness, I smelled something I had not smelled in years. Lavender and almond. The lotion my mother kept on her nightstand, the one she used every evening, rubbing it into her hands before bed. It was so distinct and so sudden that I actually stopped halfway up the stairs and turned, as if I would see her standing behind me. The air was empty. When the light steadied, the smell thinned and then vanished, leaving behind only the faint dust of the old house. I went back to my room without turning off the hallway light. In bed, I pulled the covers up to my chin and reached for my phone again, desperate for the glow. The distraction. My thumb moved almost on its own, opening my voicemail app. I do not know what I was looking for. Maybe some recorded proof that her voice had once existed outside my head. Most of the messages were dull. Spam, appointment reminders, my dad asking me to call him back. I nearly closed the app when I saw it. A voicemail from my mom. I had forgotten I still had one saved. My chest tightened. My thumb hovered over it for a long time. The date on it caught my eye and twisted my stomach into a hard knot. It was time-stamped 3 years ago, the night she died. I told myself it was a coincidence, that my brain was primed to see patterns where none existed, that it was just another cruel little overlap in a day already filled with them. Then I hit play. The recording crackled for a half second, the way they always do. And then her voice filled my room, alive and warm and tired in the exact way I remembered. She said my name. Then, in the same rhythm and tone I had just heard drifting up from the bottom of the stairs, she asked, calm and familiar and utterly wrong in that moment, "Can you come downstairs for a second?" For a second after the voicemail ended, I just lay there with the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for my own breathing to slow down. It did not. I slept in short, shallow scraps that night, waking every time the house creaked or the hallway light hummed. By morning, my head felt packed with cotton. The voice, the smell of her lotion, the voicemail with that timestamp. They all seemed like pieces of a dream that had followed me into the day, too solid to shrug off. I drove to see my dad because it felt like something normal to do. The assisted living place tried its best to look cheerful. There were muted paintings on the walls and bowls of fake fruit on side tables. Someone down the hall was playing television game shows too loud. My dad was in the common room, sitting in a soft chair by the window, staring outside as if he expected our old front yard to be there instead of a parking lot. He looked smaller somehow, but his eyes were still sharp when he saw me. "You made it back to the house," he said, like we were continuing a conversation from the day before. "Yeah," I answered, hugging him carefully. "Got in last night." He nodded. We talked about my drive, about his physical therapy, about the food. He made a joke about the coffee being so weak you could see through it. It was almost easy to forget why he was here. I circled the subject in my head for a while before I finally said as casually as I could, "The house is so quiet now. I kept thinking I heard things last night." His gaze snapped from the window to my face so fast it made me flinch. "What kind of things?" he asked. I shrugged, feeling suddenly childish. Just, you know, old pipes, creaks, maybe the radio in the kitchen. I thought I heard music for a second. Probably nothing. I guess I'm just not used to being there without you. Or her. I tried to say her without letting it wobble. His jaw clenched. The hand resting on the arm of his chair curled, the knuckles whitening. "I don't like talking about that house after dark," he said. The words were too deliberate, like a phrase he had practiced. It was not the answer I was expecting. I had been bracing for him to tell me I was overreacting, that I needed sleep, that grief could echo. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Dad, it's just a house." His eyes went past me again, toward the window, but I could tell he was not seeing the parking lot. "It's not just the house," he murmured. "It's what it remembers. Things settle in, they imitate." A chill slid down my spine. "Imitate what?" I asked. He shook his head, irritation flickering over his face as if he regretted saying anything at all. "I don't want to get into this with you. You have enough to handle. Just don't go listening when it starts. That was her mistake." My mouth went dry. Her mistake? He caught himself then. His eyes sharpened, focused again on me, and there was fear there I had never seen before. Not even the night of the fall. "She started hearing it before the fall," he said quietly. Then he clenched his mouth shut, like the words had slipped out without permission. "You mean she heard something in the house?" I pushed. "Dad, what did she hear? What are you talking about?" He shook his head again, more violently this time, and reached for the lever on his chair as if he could physically recline away from the conversation. "Drop it," he said. "I shouldn't have said anything. You're there to pack things up, that's all. Get it done and get out. And at night, stay upstairs. Don't answer if you hear anything." Anything. I wanted to tell him I had already heard something. That it was not vague, not a creak or a hum, but my mother's voice saying my name like she had just finished setting the table. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject because I could see his hands shaking. Back at the house, the afternoon light made everything look harmless. Dust floated in beams by the front windows. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawnmower droned. I almost convinced myself that the night before had been an exhausted brain playing tricks, nothing more. Then the old landline rang. The sound startled me. We had not used that phone in years. My parents mostly relied on their cells. The landline only ever seemed to ring with telemarketers or recorded political messages. The handset sat in its cradle on the little table by the stairs, half buried under a grocery flyer. It rang once. The small digital display lit up, but instead of a number, it just showed the time. 8:13. I frowned. That was impossible. It was still broad daylight. I checked my cell out of reflex. The actual time was just after 4 in the afternoon. The landline screen blinked, the numbers steady. 8:13 p.m., that time. The one from her death certificate. The time the doctor had said gently when he led us into the quiet room at the hospital. The phone went silent when I picked it up. No dial tone. No recorded voice. Just a thin, buzzing emptiness. When I pulled it away from my ear, the screen had gone blank again. When I hit the button for recent calls, the log was empty. By the time evening settled in, I had every light on in the house. The television on mute, just for the company of moving pictures. I put a mug of tea down in the kitchen and turned to the little radio on the counter, the one my mom used to play while she cooked. I had not touched it since I got back. The cord still hung looped behind it. As I looked at it, it clicked softly and came to life. Music spilled out. Only a few notes, the opening line of the old song my mom used to hum when she stirred sauce or chopped vegetables. The sound was so full, so exactly right, that my hand flew out to grip the edge of the counter. Before the line could resolve into lyrics, the music dissolved into static. Not a station change. Not bad reception. A sudden, sharp wash of white noise that lasted 3 seconds and then cut off completely, leaving the kitchen deep in a silence that felt almost relieved. I backed away from the radio. That was when I heard her again. From the hallway, from the direction of the stairs, my name floated in, bright and annoyed, the way it had when I was a teenager ignoring her calls. I froze, mug forgotten on the table. She called again, the sound fuller now, as if she were standing just around the corner. I'm not going to ask you again. The phrasing was so familiar it hurt. It was what she used to say when dinner was on the table, and I refused to pause whatever unimportant thing I was doing. It carried the same tired patience, the same affection under the scolding. Except there was something else under it now. A thin note of eagerness, almost hunger. I refused to move. My muscles locked. I stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at the dark mouth of the hallway, waiting for a shadow to detach itself from the rest and solidify. Nothing came. Eventually, the house settled back into that strange, held-breath quiet. I made myself turn away. I told myself I was following my dad's advice, that staying upstairs from now on was a rule I would keep. On the way back through the hallway, I passed the basement door. We almost never used the basement when I was growing up. It was narrow and damp and filled with things my parents could not part with but did not want to look at. My mom had always been strict about it. No going down there alone, no going down after dark, the door locked every night. The door itself was plain white, the paint a little chipped near the handle. I reached for the knob to make sure it was shut and noticed the marks. Around the inside edge of the frame, in the thin strip of wood you could see when the door was open a crack, the paint was scored with ragged lines. Long, arcing scratches clustered around the latch, as if something with desperate hands had dragged at it over and over, trying to force it closed. Or open. It was hard to tell which. My skin prickled. I leaned closer. Some of the grooves were deep enough to expose the raw wood beneath. These were not the neat, even lines a tool would make. They looked wild, panicked. I remembered my mom's key hook in the kitchen, the one she had labeled with tiny, neat letters. F for front door, B for back, G for garage. There had always been one hook marked with a single letter that never made sense to me. D. I found the board still hanging by the pantry. Most of the hooks were empty now that my dad was in the facility, his keys taken for safekeeping. But the one marked D still held a single brass key, worn smooth at the teeth from years of use. I touched it. For a second, the metal felt oddly warm, as if someone had just placed it there. I did not take it down. Not then. I told myself there was no reason to go into the basement. I went upstairs instead and stayed there, lights blazing, the hallway bulb humming like a warning. By the next afternoon, the quiet felt almost suffocating. I needed someone else in the house. Someone breathing who was not me. So I called my friend and asked them to come over, to help me with the boxes. Though what I really wanted was proof that it was all in my head. That normal conversation in takeout containers and shared complaints about how much stuff my parents had hoarded would strip the house of its strange weight. They arrived in the early evening, bringing the smell of outside air and city streets with them. We ordered food, opened a few boxes in my old room, talked about work and my dad and anything that was not the house. At some point, we both went quiet at the same time, the conversation pausing naturally. The silence of the house rushed in around us, filling the gap. My friend tilted their head, eyes flicking toward the doorway. "Did your dad come home?" they asked. I shook my head. "No, he's at the facility, remember?" "Why?" They frowned. "I just heard someone calling you from downstairs. A woman. I figured it was him watching something or—" The words slid over me like ice water. "What did you hear exactly?" I asked. They shrugged, replaying it in their mind. When they spoke again, their voice had unconsciously taken on the same gentle scold I knew too well. She said your name and then, "I'm not going to ask you again." I stared at my friend, waiting for them to laugh, to say they were kidding. They didn't. Their brows stayed creased, eyes fixed on the open doorway like they were expecting someone to walk past it. "You heard that just now?" I asked. "Yeah." They looked at me. "You didn't?" My throat felt too tight. I shook my head. "No. Must have been the TV downstairs or something. Old houses carry sound weird." "We turned the TV off," they said quietly. I changed the subject after that. We finished our food. We went through a couple more boxes. When they finally left, the air seemed to rush back into the house, like it had been holding itself in while we were not alone. I did not sleep much that night either. The next morning, I decided to do something relentlessly normal. Laundry. The hamper upstairs was already full from my dad's clothes and the things I'd dragged out of closets, so I hauled it down to the little laundry room off the kitchen. The room always felt like an afterthought, squeezed in behind the pantry. The floor was old linoleum, yellowed and curling at the edges. As I stepped in front of the washing machine, the floor dipped unexpectedly under my weight. I startled, grabbing the side of the machine. A soft cracking sound came from under my heel. I stepped back and saw that one of the boards beneath the loose linoleum had warped upward, creating a slight ridge. When I pressed it with my toe, it shifted. The part of my brain trained by horror movies told me to leave it alone. The practical part, the one already thinking about repair costs, crouched down and pried it up. Underneath, in the shallow, dusty space, lay a thin notebook. It was damp around the edges, the cardboard cover warped, but I would have recognized it anywhere. My mom used these cheap little notebooks for everything from recipes to to-do lists. She bought them in bulk. My hands were suddenly clumsy as I pulled it out and wiped off the dust. Her handwriting was on the first page. Grocery items, a recipe, a note to remind herself to call my aunt. Normal, domestic fragments. I flipped through more of the same. What she needed from the hardware store, which plants needed repotting, a reminder to schedule my dad's appointment. Then the tone shifted. The lines stopped being lists and turned into paragraphs. The dates in the corner of each page marched forward, a day at a time. I had trouble reading the first entry twice. The words rippled on the page. Today I heard myself calling from downstairs. I eased back against the wall, the washing machine humming quietly beside me, and kept reading. She wrote about being in the bedroom, folding laundry, when she heard her own voice calling my name from the front hall. At first she thought it was a recording, or a neighbor with a similar voice. But the phrasing, the tone, matched something she had said earlier that day. She wrote about standing at the top of the stairs, listening and hearing it again. Her own voice, overlaid with a faint echo, asking my dad to come down and look at something. Except my dad had been at work. The entries went on for weeks, small, scared observations squeezed into the margins of daily life. Sometimes it was her voice, sometimes mine, sometimes my dad's, always coming from a room she was not in. She tried to make rules for herself. She wrote them down on a fresh page, the handwriting darker, the pen pressed harder into the paper. Never answer if your own voice calls you. Never go to the floor it is calling from. Never admit out loud that you hear it. If you break a rule, do not use the stairs. Underneath, she had added in smaller letters, I think it listens for the stairs. My stomach rolled. I thought of the first night back, when I had heard her calling from downstairs and immediately gone down to check. I thought of sitting in my dad's chair at the facility, saying the words I keep thinking I hear things in that house. I had already broken at least 2 of her rules without knowing they existed. Further on, her writing grew shakier. She started second-guessing herself. Maybe she was overtired. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was grief. But then there were entries where she mentioned the landline ringing only to show the wrong time, the radio turning itself on, the smell of my lotion in the hallway when I wasn't home. Pieces I recognized, echoed now in my own days. Near the end, there was an entry about a night when she was alone in the house. My dad working late, me already moved out. She wrote that the voice had changed. It no longer sounded like an echo of something she had said, but something trying to be her. The night she died, there was an entry too. The handwriting looped oddly, the ink blotting in places like her hand had trembled. It knows I'm alone tonight. It sounds more like me than I do. There was no entry after that. I closed the notebook carefully and pressed my forehead against my knees. For a long time, I did not move. The washing machine stopped. The quiet pressed in. That night, I took the journal up to my room with me. I did not turn the television on. I did not put in headphones. I sat on my bed with every light on and watched the digital clock on my phone crawl toward 8:13. If there were rules, I would follow them now. I would not answer. I would not go to the floor it called from. I would not say anything out loud. As the numbers rolled over to 8:12, I was upstairs, heart pounding, fingers digging into the soft paper cover of the notebook. The house was so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. 8:13. A floorboard creaked. The voice came, right on time. But it did not drift up from downstairs. It came from behind me, from the top of the stairs, from exactly where I was, as if the house had turned itself inside out. I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway that no one had walked in years. I heard the slight familiar catch in her breath. Then, so close it stirred the tiny hairs along the back of my neck, she leaned in. She did not say my name. She used the small, soft nickname she had only ever called me in the oldest parts of my childhood, the one no one else knew, the one she used when I was sick or afraid, and she whispered it right into my ear. When she whispered that nickname in my ear, every muscle in my body locked. For a second, I thought if I did not move, whatever it was would stay behind me, frozen in that half space between breath and sound. The hallway light hummed above us. The bulb flickered once. I could feel warmth against the shell of my ear that did not belong to anything I could see. The journal slipped from my hand and hit the floor. You're not her.